Hey everybody, welcome to the second of the college football season preview and prediction videos. I'm doing a series of prediction videos on this channel, and I'm also doing as many of the 32 teams as I can a preview and prediction video for over on the GoPats 99 channel. That's my pro football talk channel, similar to this one except for NFL content. So if you like this, what you see on this channel, feel free to go subscribe to GoPats99. There will be a link in the description. And as I said on the GoPats99 channel, I will be alternating between videos for this channel and the GoPats99 channel. So the next one is going to be on the GoPats99 channel. Now today, we're doing the second of the schedule preview and prediction videos for college football. The first one I did was last week for Ohio State. Today, I'm coming on to preview and predict for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Last year, in a way, was disappointing for the Crimson Tide, as after, I want to say, 15 consecutive seasons of having 10 wins or more, Alabama went 9-4. Now, on one hand, that is disappointing. Alabama had, and especially when it comes to the fact that Alabama had multiple games last year that were right within their hands and completely dropped it. I'm looking specifically at the Vanderbilt game, I'm looking at the Tennessee game, and I'm looking at the Michigan game. On the other hand, Alabama did show flashes of the future and what can possibly be with Kalen DeBoer. We did beat the number one team in week 5. We did go 3-1 against ranked teams. Our only loss to a ranked team being against Tennessee. But on the other hand, we did see 3 of the 4 losses being to unranked teams. That definitely has to improve for Alabama, especially if Kalen DeBoer wants to survive beyond year 3 or 2. Obviously, the biggest thing is the unranked losses. They were unexcusable, especially when we lost to Vanderbilt in week 6, when we lost to Oklahoma in the second to last week of the regular season, and then in the bowl game when we lost to Michigan. Because that destroyed a season where Alabama got a win over the number 1 ranked team and went 3-1 against ranked teams. Because Missouri, South Carolina, and Georgia were all ranked teams. On the other hand, how in the hell do you lose to Vanderbilt like that? How do you lose by 3 possessions to a 6-7 Oklahoma team? And how do you lose to that Michigan team? And especially, how do you do all that but beat Georgia? Is what I'm still trying to wonder. Now, Alabama still looks a lot more talented this year. Again, had a great recruiting class. Did bring in 10 good transfers through the portal. And by the end of it, we actually did not lose any players in the spring transfer portal window. So things are on the upswing. It looks like the players are starting to buy into Kalen DeBoer's system. Now, obviously, the biggest loss is going to be at the quarterback position, Jalen Milroe. Say what you want about Jalen Milroe. However, he single-handedly kept Alabama in some of these games. And he's probably the one reason we beat LSU as badly as we did. We all saw him just completely run all over LSU's defense. In games where he was able to unleash himself, Alabama did great. But I felt like the problem with Milroe is that they tried to use Kalen DeBoer's old system from Washington on Jalen Milroe, which worked for Michael Penix, but Michael Penix is the kind of quarterback that Kalen DeBoer wants. Jalen Milroe, he can make some really good throws. We all saw that excellent throw at the end of the Georgia game where he threw the touchdown to Ryan Williams. However, he is not designed to throw the ball 50 times a game. He is designed for like 25 attempts most, and then get it done with his legs. Now, the quarterback we assume we're going to have this year is more fitted to Kalen DeBoer's system, Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson is mobile, but he's not a primarily running guy. He's more akin to what Mac Jones was at Alabama than he is to Jalen Milroe. Now, I'm not calling him Mac Jones 2.0 because Mac Jones was great at Alabama, but then flopped in New England. Although you can watch my New England preview and prediction video to see the real reason why he flopped. But he is more akin to Kalen DeBoer's ideal system than Jalen Milroe is. So we'll see how that affects Alabama going forward. My primary concern with Alabama is on the offensive line, because that offensive line has not been good since 2023. We've had mobile quarterbacks that have been able to disguise the weakness of the offensive line. Bryce Young, namely, he was able to camouflage the weaknesses of the offensive line while he was there. And then, of course, Jalen Milroe, with his running ability, was able to camouflage that weakness. Ty Simpson is not going to be able to camouflage that weakness as good as Bryce Young or Jalen Milroe were. So that is going to have to be the number one area of improvement, is that offensive line. Now, in terms of talent we do keep running back Jam Miller, who's been producing for Alabama for a couple years. He returns for his final season. We also do keep both of our key wide receivers from last year, Jeremy Bernard, and of course the amazing Ryan Williams, who many people have already pegged as a Heisman favorite. I myself am a little bit afraid because I'm afraid I jinx it. We also do bring in one of Miami's key leading receivers from last year. On defense, the only real notable departure is Malachi Moore. And of course, Alabama did recruit good this year, and they also did bring in 10 good transfers. I don't really have a lot of concerns in terms of replacing talent we lost. My concern, of course, is, like I said, that offensive line needs to be a lot better. And our passing game needs to be better overall, which I do think will help. I'm not saying Jalen Milroe is a bad quarterback or was bad for Alabama. But what I am saying is that with the system Kalen DeBoer wants to run, which is a pass-heavy team, Ty Simpson is better for that type of system than Jalen Milroe is. Now, that doesn't mean automatically that Ty Simpson is going to be the best quarterback ever Alabama has. We've barely seen him play. The most we've seen him play was in the second half of the 2023 USF game, and then what happened right after that one? Oh, Jalen Milroe was practically renamed the starter. But I do think that in terms system-wise, Simpson is going to be better than Milroe. It also is going to help that Kalen DeBoer is bringing in Ryan Grubb. Ryan Grubb was the offensive coordinator at Washington while Kalen DeBoer was there. Was originally supposed to follow him to Alabama, but then he accepted a coordinatorship at the Seattle Seahawks. But then he left and he just rejoined Kalen DeBoer in Alabama. Now let's look at Alabama's schedule and try to predict what their record is going to be for 2025. Now, Alabama actually starts the season on the road, which is rare for Alabama. Alabama rarely has their first game on the road. But Alabama's first game this year is going to be on the road as the first part of a home-and-home series against the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State last year was the most disappointing team in college football because they went 13-1 with their lone loss in 2023 being against Georgia. Everybody thought, oh, they might actually be good. But then the second they took the field, everything fell apart. They went 2-10. DJ Uiagalelei, if I'm even pronouncing his name right, completely flopped and then got injured. The whole roster crumbled. This patchwork of a roster that Mike Norvell put together completely crumbled, and now he has to try to fix it again. A lot of fans actually wanted him gone, but Florida State is so entangled with lawsuits at the moment that they cannot afford to fire anybody. And so they have to keep him, and now he's trying to patch up again that roster. I do think Florida State might be better than they were in 2024, but that's still a very low benchmark. And I think Alabama comes on the road in week 1 to beat Florida State. And then, not to mention, Alabama has not lost a road conference game since 2007, that being to Florida State, when Florida State was actually good. I think in this case, Alabama will come on the road and beat Florida State. In the second game of the season, Alabama is coming back for their home opener, and they will be playing Louisiana Monroe. Speaking of 2007, we all remember what happened in 2007 with the ULM getting the upset over Alabama in hilarious fashion. This is not 2007. Alabama is way more talented than UL Monroe, and I think UL Monroe loses this one in tremendously bad fashion. I think Alabama might actually score in the 60s with this one. And then for the third week, second home game, you get to play the second half of your home and home series against Wisconsin. Last year, you went into Camp Randall Stadium in Wisconsin and completely smashed them. I want to say 45-10. It was something along those lines. This year, you get them at home. I think this is going to be Luke Fickell's last year. He has not looked well. Wisconsin is bound to lose a lot of games this year given their schedule. And I think Alabama is going to take care of business in week 3, giving themselves a 3-0 start before heading into their first of 2 bye weeks. I forgot to mention this in the Ohio State video, but every team this year gets 2 bye weeks because of the way the calendar falls. Because this is a year where instead of there being 13 Saturdays in between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, there is 14. And because college football operates on a 12-game schedule, they made it to where they still start on Labor Day weekend, but every team gets an extra bye week. But you get your extra bye week, and it comes at a good time because in week 5 you have to go on the road for your first SEC game of the year, and you couldn't ask for a tougher situation for your first conference game of the year, being that you have to play on the road against Georgia. Georgia has come this close to being a 4-time defending SEC champion. The only times they even lost in the SEC championship game was against Alabama, and they even won it last year, despite the fact that Carson Beck, who was their starting quarterback, got injured in the second half, and they had to rely on Gunnar Stockton, and he ended up leading them to the victory. Now, granted, they did lose to Notre Dame in the first round, but I think by this point, Gunnar Stockton will have enough time to mature. Georgia actually does play a reasonably tough game prior to playing Alabama when they have to go on the road to play Tennessee, whereas Alabama, none of their opponents are going to be ranked in the top 25 by that point, or top 25 that they have actually played. I know we've looked at Georgia versus Alabama and say, oh, Georgia can't beat Alabama. But keep in mind, all of Alabama's wins against Georgia in the Kirby Smart era have taken place at one of 2 stadiums. They've either taken place at Bryant-Denny Stadium in the case of 2024 and 2020, or they've taken place in Mercedes-Benz Stadium like it did in 2017 in the 2017 National Championship, the 2018 SEC Championship, the 2021 and 2023 SEC Championships. The lone time Kirby Smart has beaten Georgia, Kirby Smart can't beat Georgia. He's coaching the team. The lone time Kirby Smart has beaten Alabama was in a neutral site that wasn't Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the 2021 national title game. The fact that Alabama has to go on the road against a tough opponent, Georgia's the toughest opponent Alabama faces all year. It's at home for Georgia, which Alabama has not played on the road against Georgia since 2015. Unfamiliar environment. I think Georgia gets the win here. I think that's finally what puts Georgia over the line to get a major regular season win against Alabama. Following that, though, you then go home to play Vanderbilt. Now, last year, Vanderbilt did beat Alabama in their own stadium. This year, the game is at home where the crowd is going to be absolutely raucous because it's a revenge game. More than likely, instead of getting the emotional win, I think Alabama in this case is going to be on an emotional loss and ready to come out and swinging. I think they beat Vanderbilt this year. Hopefully, I'm not proven wrong again, but I think this time Alabama beats Vanderbilt. Following the game against Vanderbilt, you then go on the road to play Missouri. I have a lot of questions about Missouri this year, and especially their quarterback. Brady Cook, who had been so good for Missouri and led them to 2 seasons where they finished ranked, is now gone. He's being replaced by, I think, Drew Pyne. In the games that we saw Drew Pyne, I was not impressed with Drew Pyne. Now, he could definitely become better. However, I think Missouri kind of takes a step off after 2 amazing years. I think Alabama wins this one on the road against Missouri. But then after that game, you're already on what might be the toughest 5-game stretch on your schedule. In fact, I think it is the toughest 5-game stretch on the schedule. Might even be the toughest 5-game stretch in the SEC. But this 2-game stretch is the toughest 2-game stretch on Alabama's schedule. Now, keep in mind, I already said I think Georgia's the toughest opponent Alabama plays. But the fact that these 2 opponents in a row show up on Alabama's schedule in the middle of what is already a somewhat tough 5-game stretch adds to it being a tough 2-game stretch. Starting off with at home against Tennessee, followed by on the road against South Carolina. Starting with Tennessee. Again, a revenge game for Alabama because Alabama played Tennessee last year in Knoxville and lost. Now this year you get the game at home. Nico Iamaleava, who was really the only kind of reason you might have picked them to beat Alabama, as well as probably the only reason you would have picked them to beat Georgia, is now gone. He left in a rather messy situation going to UCLA. I don't even know who Tennessee's quarterback is going to be this year because we only knew Nico. We didn't know the other ones. But they're coming to Alabama. Tennessee struggles on the road a lot in these big games, and especially with it being in Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's the 3rd Saturday in October, so the Alabama crowd is going to be absolutely rocking because not only do you have revenge game, but you have Alabama's 3rd Saturday in October, which has recently become Alabama's most competitive rivalry game. I think Alabama does actually beat Tennessee. However, after Tennessee, you then have to go on the road to South Carolina. Now, you have to understand the Vanderbilt loss from last year to truly understand what is in play here when Alabama plays South Carolina. Because last year, the big reason Alabama lost to Vanderbilt was because they were coming off of that emotional win against Georgia at home and then turning around to play on the road, which is a tough situation. Now, that's still no excuse for losing to Vanderbilt because Alabama should have won that one and had plenty of opportunities to win that one against Vanderbilt. But I really don't think they would have lost to Vanderbilt if Vanderbilt would have been the Week 1 game instead of the right after Georgia game. I bring that up because this game against South Carolina is in a very similar position to the Vanderbilt game from last year. It's right after an emotional game because Tennessee and Alabama are rivals. You would have probably been more primarily focused on Tennessee. Then you have to go on the road at South Carolina. What makes this even worse is that South Carolina is a lot more talented this year than Vanderbilt was last year. And you went to Vanderbilt Stadium, which was being repaired at the time, and lost. This year you had to go to South Carolina, who almost beats Alabama last year. It was a 2-point game, and Alabama had to intercept the ball at the last second to win the game. They still bring back Lenoir Sellers and Rocket Sanders, a reasonably talented roster. Shane Beamer returns for, I believe, his 5th year so far. It's in William Bryce Stadium. I think South Carolina gets the upset here. I think South Carolina, the week after, taking advantage of the fact that Alabama will have just come off of that emotional game against Tennessee, their rivals, and lose into South Carolina in kind of a similar way to how Alabama lost to Vanderbilt last year, coming off of that emotional game against Georgia. But luckily for you, after the South Carolina game, you do get your second bye week. And I can't be the only one who notices and wonders why in the hell Alabama's bye week always happens in this spot. Either the first Saturday of November or the last Saturday of October, depending on, again, how the calendar falls. And then either the first weekend of November or the second weekend of November, depending on how the calendar falls, the opponent is LSU. And what's even weirder is that LSU always also has a bye week before playing Bama. And that this year's no exception. LSU is going to be on a bye week before playing Alabama. Alabama stomped LSU last year, but that was mostly because the defense could not contain Milroe as a mobile quarterback. Now, I do think Alabama's offense will be more geared for success than they were last year. But you also got to remember LSU's defense, they got a lot of transfers. In fact, LSU had the #1 transfer portal class this past year, along with a reasonably good recruiting class. The question here is, can we trust Brian Kelly to get a major win against an SEC team on the road? Because, yes, he did get his biggest win was against Alabama in 2022, but that was at home. He has not beaten Alabama since. And it seems like every time LSU under Brian Kelly has gone on the road to play a major SEC game, they've lost. You mean, look at 2022, they had the loss to Ole Miss and Alabama. Last year it was to Texas, and then somehow lost on the road. Not Texas, Texas A&M, and then lost on the road against Florida. This year, LSU has to come to Bryant-Denny Stadium. I think the road curse, once again, hits LSU. It's going to be a close game. I do have a lot of faith in LSU's offense, especially with Nussmeier. If Nussmeier can cut down on the amount of interceptions he throws, LSU's offense is going to be dynamic, especially since we all know how good second-year starting LSU quarterbacks can be. I'm looking right at Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, both of whom won Heisman's in their second year as starting quarterbacks at LSU. That offense is going to be deadly. Can the defense improve enough to stop Alabama in their tracks? But I do think the fact that we really can't trust LSU in a major road SEC game is going to come back to haunt LSU here, and Alabama gets the win over LSU. Ironic. I also want to remark briefly that it's very ironic how I did not expect Vanderbilt, Tennessee, or Oklahoma last year to beat Alabama, yet they did. Yet I predicted LSU to beat Alabama when nobody else predicted LSU to beat Alabama, and Alabama just blows LSU out the water. I don't think this year is going to be a year where Alabama blows LSU out the water, but I do think Alabama gets the win in Bryant-Denny Stadium over LSU. Which, speaking of Oklahoma, I inadvertently foreshadowed this. After playing LSU at home, you have your second consecutive home game. It is going to be homecoming, and you are playing Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma last year got the big upset over Alabama. However, they did go 6-7, losing the bowl game to Navy. It feels like the past, well, not really the past couple years, because Oklahoma did have a decent year in 2023. But the year after that for Brent Venables was terrible. I think this is going to be Brent Venables' last year as the head coach of Oklahoma. I think after this season, if Oklahoma doesn't have a breakout year, is going to be where Oklahoma moves on from Brent Venables. Wolves. Alabama is definitely going to be more talented this year than Oklahoma is, but that meant nothing last year when Alabama went on the road to Norman, Oklahoma. However, Oklahoma has not, it's been multiple decades since Oklahoma has played on the road at Alabama. And you combine that with the fact that Oklahoma's roster isn't that great. Jackson Arnold got ran out of town. He's now at Auburn. I think Alabama wins this one, especially with homecoming, coupling with the fact that it's a revenge game for Alabama. The crowd is going to be rocking. Oklahoma may not be able to stand it. It could be a blowout situation. It could be surprisingly close, because Oklahoma, for some reason, has that one game a year that's either surprisingly close or they get the upset, like they did last year at Alabama and the year prior against Texas. But I don't know. Can we actually trust them to get the win in Bryant-Denny Stadium against Alabama? I don't think we can. After that, you get your third consecutive home game, your final home game. It'll be Eastern Illinois. Nothing really to talk about here. Alabama gets the win easily. But to wrap up the season, and possibly with Alabama's playoff hopes on the line, you have to go on the road at Jordan-Hare Stadium to play Auburn. And the reason why I said that line with about Alabama possibly having their playoff hopes on the line against Auburn is because the last two times Alabama, or actually the last three, might as well throw in, Alabama had their playoff hopes on the line going into Auburn and was easily more talented than Auburn. But in 2019's case, Alabama lost and no more shot at the playoffs for them. 2021, Alabama went in with already one loss and needing a win, especially since they would have to go on the road, go to the conference game the next week against Georgia. And Alabama needed 4 overtimes to beat an Auburn team that was on a backup quarterback. And then, of course, 2023, Alabama needs a win to keep their playoff hopes alive. And Alabama needs the miracle play on 4th and 31 in order to win the game. It seems like Jordan-Hare Stadium is one of those stadiums that Alabama goes to that they have trouble getting wins that they should. And it's not just Alabama that struggles when they go on the road to Auburn, because if you look at Georgia also for some reason seems to struggle when they go on the road to play Auburn at Jordan-Hare. If you really want to go deep, then you'll realize that every SEC team other than LSU, for some reason, seems to struggle when they go on the road to Auburn. Clearly this year, Alabama is more talented than Auburn. Heck. Auburn is a combined 11-14 in the 2 years so far under Hugh Freeze. I do think Auburn is a little bit better than they were. However, my concern with Auburn is the quarterback situation, because they do bring in Jackson Arnold. And the question that's going to be answered is, who was the bigger problem? Was Jackson Arnold the bigger problem for Oklahoma, and that's going to hurt Auburn? Was Oklahoma the problem for Jackson Arnold, and we'll see Jackson Arnold perform better in Auburn than Oklahoma? Or could it possibly be that both Jackson Arnold and Oklahoma were the problem, and both will struggle? My bet is that it's the last one I said, that Jackson Arnold and Oklahoma were both the problem. Again, I have my concerns about Alabama going on the road to play Auburn simply because of what we've seen. And it's a common theme, really. We've seen Alabama either struggle or lose in situations where they shouldn't have on the road against Auburn. 2009, for example, Alabama went down 14-0 at one point and had to come back to win the game. Of course, we all remember the infamous Kick 6 game from 2013. We all remember 2017 where Alabama was undefeated going into the game and Auburn had 2 losses, but then Auburn won the game and knocked Alabama out of the SEC title game. We all remember 2019 when Alabama was more talented than Auburn and Alabama lost, knocking themselves out of the playoffs and a New Year's Six appearance. 2021, we all remember Alabama needing 4 overtimes to beat Auburn. And then, of course, 2023, we all remember Alabama needing 4th and 31 to beat Auburn. I am not going to be shocked at all if Alabama struggles in this game. In fact, I expect Alabama to... I become at the point where I don't even expect Alabama to dominate in Auburn. It will come more of a shock to me if Alabama were to struggle in this game against Auburn than if Alabama were to... Then if I would be more shocked... Let me retry that sentence. I will be more shocked if Alabama dominates Auburn this year than if Auburn keeps up with Alabama for 4 9/10 of a quarter, 3 9/10 of a quarter. But I do think Alabama pulls it off. I don't trust Hugh Freeze here. I also don't trust Jackson Arnold enough for Auburn to beat Alabama. I think it's going to be at a crucial. My pick is of how this all falls apart is that Alabama is up by like 5 in the last drive, and Auburn's trying to drive, but then Jackson Arnold throws an interception. I think that's how it's going to go down. But I do think Alabama will struggle in this game against Auburn, and I think in this case, Alabama in this schedule in 2025 goes 10-2 with their losses being to Georgia and South Carolina. Is that going to be enough to get Alabama in the playoffs? Yes. I believe unless there's a whole bunch of SEC teams that go 10-2, that 10-2 will be enough to get any SEC team into the playoffs. I think up to 5 SEC teams could get into the playoffs this year. Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, LSU, and Tennessee. Texas too. Any 6 of those SEC schools getting the playoffs would not shock me. Is that going to be enough to get Alabama into the SEC championship game? We don't know, because it wasn't enough to get Tennessee in the SEC title game last year. It depends on who in the SEC goes 10-2, who in the SEC goes 11-1. If somebody in the SEC goes 12-0, which I don't think happens, but I do think at the very least a 10-2 Alabama team gets into the playoffs, unless a whole bunch of teams that the CFP committee considers better than Alabama go 10-2. That is my prediction video for Alabama 2025. Look out. The next one on this channel is going to be the Texas Longhorns somewhere at the late part of the week or the early part of next week. However, the next one I'm doing, as I said, I'm alternating between the ones on this channel and the ones on the Pro Football channel, Go Pats 99. So look out for later in the week, probably around Thursday or something, when I release a video for a prediction on the defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. And then somewhere in the next couple days afterwards, you will see me release the Texas Longhorns preview and prediction video. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy your week. This is Roll Tide 99. I am signing off.